By writing to a member of the British cabinet instead of Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, Roosevelt broke with established diplomatic etiquette. But it was a strategy that fit into the clandestine world FDR loved.
And Roosevelt, in essence, is saying, I recognize the correctness of your posture. I don't want to speak to the Prime Minister of Britain in candid ways that I'll speak to you, because this will, so to speak, be off the record, behind the scenes. I'm really an internationalist. I'm not an isolationist. I have to appear to be an isolationist. My posture has to be that because of American domestic politics. And if I give this kind of information that I'm giving to you to the British Prime Minister, it's all the more likely to leak out and cause me all sorts of grief at home.
Both men assumed the correspondence would be confidential. They were wrong. There had been a major and potentially explosive breach of security at the American Embassy on Grosvenor Square in London. There, a young cipher clerk, Tyler Kent, was intercepting each of the top-secret messages and making copies. He intended to hand the incriminating material to Senator Arthur Vandenberg, a leader of the isolationist movement in the U.S. Senate.
Well, I think the Tyler Kent affair is one of the sort of the great unexploded bombs, if you like, of the Second World War.
For the next 6 months, Roosevelt wrote to Churchill without knowing that Kent was taking down every word. FDR now faced the greatest political decision of his life, whether to run for a third term as president. He sent clear signals that he wanted to retire to Hyde Park. He built Top Cottage, a small house on his estate that had a magnificent view of the Hudson River and the Catskill Mountains. He told friends that after the tripling of taxes and with unemployment still close to 20%, the Republicans would savage him if he decided to run again on his record.
How can you claim that you have made people better off, that you have gone 2 complete terms and you haven't brought about a recovery in the American economy from this depression? If you were running in 1940 on your record, your economic record, it's a dismal record.
That economic assessment is based on his failure to pull the nation out of the Depression. It is not the view of many historians who credit Roosevelt for advancing American society in the 1930s in a multitude of ways.
What doesn't show up on the performance indicators was the restoration of hope, and I think that's immeasurable and something that America today might be a quite different country if Roosevelt had not managed to restore America's belief in itself.
But overshadowing the past was the looming specter of a future war. FDR told party leaders he would not actively seek the Democratic nomination, but if the party felt they needed him in this time of crisis, he would find it hard to refuse a draft. Dawn on the morning of May 10th, 1940. German panzer divisions moved with lightning speed. Overrunning Belgium, Luxembourg, and Holland. 200,000 men, 3,000 aircraft moved towards the French border. In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain stood before the House of Commons, his Munich Accord in shreds. There would be no peace in this time. In the name of God, go, was the call from a senior member of his own Conservative Party. Hours later, he resigned to be replaced by Winston Churchill. King George VI had chosen a man well aware of the enormity of the challenge that lay ahead.
You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory.
3,500 miles away, Franklin Roosevelt remained a mere spectator, constrained by the neutrality laws that were supported by overwhelming popular opinion. He was reduced to watching the unfolding events that revealed the level of America's impotence.
By the late 1930s, the United States military establishment, Army and Navy and Air Forces alike, ranked probably 15th or 16th or 17th in the world, way down the list of effective military powers. So this was one known constraint that Roosevelt faced.
The American president commanded an air wing that didn't have planes, a navy without ships, and troops that fired flour bags at cardboard tanks to simulate the reality of war. Hardly a force likely to turn back a Nazi blitzkrieg. There was another far more important constraint, the preponderant will of the American people. In poll after poll, they insisted that the United States should stay out of this European war. FDR could read the polls, but also knew he had to encourage Churchill. He continued his private back channel without knowing that Tyler Kent, the cipher clerk at the American Embassy in London, was monitoring all the traffic. By the middle of May, Kent had accumulated documents detailing private assurances and shared goals that, if released, would change the course of American political history.
This would have enraged an isolationist Congress. It would have proven to the American people that what they had been saying all along was correct, that the president was not really telling the truth.
On May 20th, 1940, Prime Minister Winston Churchill was at his country home at Chartwell, 20 miles south of London. He was told that MI5, the British intelligence service, had been tracking Kent for months and believed he was about to flee the country. Churchill ordered his arrest, and that night, Tyler Kent and over 1,400 documents were seized at his home in southwest London. Had MI5 waited 24 hours, the documents would have been in the hands of the isolationist America First movement. Roosevelt's domestic critics always accused him of being duplicitous. Armed with Kent's treachery, they would have been able to argue that they had the evidence to prove it.
If Americans had known that Roosevelt was having a secret dialogue with Churchill, and that he was in any way at all assuring Churchill that we were going to be there for Britain, to shore them up, to back them up, to assure against British defeat against the Nazis, it would have defeated Roosevelt in the 1940 campaign.
3 weeks after Churchill assumed the premiership, Britain's army was poised to absorb one of the greatest military defeats in its history. Nearly 400,000 men were trapped on a beachhead at Dunkirk in France, with the Germans pressing their advantage. It appeared the British Expeditionary Force was about to be annihilated. They were saved when more than 200 British naval vessels and 800 civilian boats crossed the English Channel and picked up more than 335,000 stranded British soldiers.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
There's no question that Roosevelt was keenly aware that 80 to 90% of the country did not want to become directly involved in the war, and a strong 60 to 70% didn't even want to be selling supplies at that point, even to Britain.
This island, or a large part of it, was subjugated and starving. The New World, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
Well, the New World only meant one thing, and that was Franklin Roosevelt. Churchill was playing to an audience of one.
But then, nothing. No declaration, no American promise to deploy force. 2 weeks later, France fell, and Churchill told his cabinet that Roosevelt seemed intent to watch from the sidelines as Britain went down to defeat.
There was bitterness. I'd say there was a period where Churchill was bitter and where he would make remarks to his closest associates, such as, the Americans are very good at applauding the brave deeds of others. So there was that element.
Roosevelt felt the prime minister didn't understand the precarious nature of his hold on power. Whatever his private belief, he knew an overwhelming number of Americans still resisted joining in the fight. In the summer of 1940, he did take one more incremental step toward engagement. He pushed through a bill to initiate a draft, to start building an army that could fight. But Roosevelt's future was still in doubt. 1940 was an election year, and no man had ever run for a third term as president. On July 19th, FDR finally broke his silence. From his study at Hyde Park, he spoke to delegates at the Democratic Convention in Chicago.
If I am called upon to do so by the people of my